Hey folks, Trubie here, once again to talk to you about Dice Masters. So, after some spirited discussion in the comments on my last video, I thought today we'd talk about globals. So, just as a reminder, globals are the red text you see on cards that are available to both players. And since that's both players, that's where you can get into trouble if you aren't really paying attention to what you're adding to your team when you're team building. So, when you're selecting your cards and what globals are going to be on your team, I think you need to be careful and need to remember that your opponent gets to use them too, and it can hurt you. So, for example, if we're talking about a team that uses Overcrush as your win condition, you don't want to have something like Cape Bishop or Smash here on your team, because Cape Bishop, the global, she can just basically pay a mass, send your Overcrush card back, doesn't deal any damage, or same thing with Smash, just pay a fist. Overcrush card does no damage. Similarly, if you're using Blob as a control piece, you don't want to bring Arch Nemesis, because then you're just creating a problem where you get Blob out, they use Arch Nemesis, Blob becomes a 1 defense, and they can then just ping it off with Magic Missile or something to that effect. So yeah, it can cause you some problems. So also, like when we're talking about things like energy fixers, so those are the ones, let me bring one up, that you can pay 0 and turn a sidekick to a specific energy type. I think you can play a little more fast and loose with these. These are less likely to actually hurt you, but generally I would still favor the ones that are actually useful if you buy them and add them, and if you actually are buying the die itself. Merlin here was great because he had the fixer and was a backup win condition. So, he could still usually get through unblocked, and also helped you get those bolts. So similarly, that's why I actually prefer going with the new Billy Club over Clayface, where with Billy Club, you get backup removal, so you might actually want to buy Billy Club. With Clayface, it's just a big card with a weird ability that doesn't really help you very much. So it's kind of a dead slot. This is also why, even though I love Fist Energy, I've been reluctant to use Yarnbjorn on any of my teams because, unless it's an Immortal team, because the Yarnbjorn, when you buy the die, only really helps teams with Immortal characters. Granted, this is more personal preference than anything, but I just hate the feeling I'm wasting a slot on a team just for the global. And speaking of wasting slots for just a global, this brings me to my old nemesis, Professor X, and another Golden Age favorite, Blue Eyes White Dragon. These were two of the big staples back in the day, but these days. So first off, everything, and we're going more Golden Age here. So we're talking Golden. Modern, obviously, he's not available, and energy fixers, you have to go with the new Thor stuff. But the general concept still applies, Golden Age or Modern. But with Professor X, you're still likely going to see Professor X around if you're playing Golden Age, and I think having him on your team could be a liability. So if your team heavily relies on Professor X and requires you to get to like 5, 6, or 7 cost characters to win, you could be creating yourself a serious problem, because there's lots of things that sort of neuter that. Like, for example, let's just bring up a couple of them here. You've got, Prismatic Spray, 2 versions of Shriek, Oracle, Jinzo, Wrecker, Tomb Guardian, and there's actually several more out there that I haven't mentioned, like Enchantress. I'm sure I'm forgetting more of them. Wonder Woman. I actually forgot to bring in Wonder Woman here. Even though I do have her card, forgot to bring it in. So there's all these cards, plus all the stuff that's going to be in Avengers Infinity, which we've been seeing spoilers for. All of these just shut down Professor X, and with all these anti-global cards out there, your opponent can either temporarily shut you down while still taking full advantage of it for themselves, tax you heavily for using it, or simply shut it off entirely. So, designing your team in a way that still functions without Professor X can still be, so you want to design your team in a way that that you can function without Professor X, but if they have Professor X, if your opponent brings it, you can still effectively use it. And then really that's just the best way to design a team. So I think of it like if you're in a gunfight and everyone is out of ammo, the person who is trained in hand-to-hand is going to have a huge advantage. Or to quote Starship Troopers, when asked, who needs a knife in a nuke fight anyway, all you have to do is push a button. Drill Instructor Zim, after throwing a knife through the cadet's hand, says, the enemy cannot push a button if you disable their hand. So there we go. Professor X can be shut down, and if you're relying on him, you got problems. Next up, let's move on to Blue Eyes White Dragon. There's a lot to hide here. Yeah, there we go. I'm here again. So, now, Blue Eyes. He isn't quite as much of a liability as Professor X, but there are still things you need to keep in mind with it, like I would only use it if you have some sort of when KO'd effect or when fielded effect you need to use repeatedly. For example, if you're using like Firefly or like Norman Osborn or Gabi, excuse me, you're fielding them, dealing damage, and then you want to cycle them so they can be refielded again to deal damage. So with Blue Eyes, you field it, you KO it, all of a sudden your stuff costs 2 less, so you can buy another Firefly for a bolt. Then the next turn, you're fielding that Firefly again, and just wash, repeat, you're dealing tons of damage. Similarly, there's also stuff with KO effects, like Pyro here, who I've always liked, but I haven't really gotten him to work well yet. If you paired him with like the Too Cool for Words global, where you can spin all your sidekicks to bolts, I think he'd be pretty awesome, especially with Blue Eyes. So I spin everything to bolts, KO Pyro, all of a sudden now you take 5-6 damage, whatever. But also, if you have the Blue Eyes White Dragon global and your opponent has it as well, that means that you can do it twice. So I mean, if you don't have a team that optimizes itself to use these when KO'd effects or cycling stuff like Firefly here, you're setting yourself up for a problem. Because you're giving your opponent the chance to use it twice. You need to be able to have a reason for using it yourself. I mean, yes, the discount is nice, but there are other ways to get to that discount or get to those higher cost characters without heavily relying on these globals. No, that's there we have it. I mean, these aren't hard and fast rules. This is more just like personal preference, and I'm not saying your team's going to suck if you ignore what I'm saying. No, absolutely not. This is just my basic guidance for optimal team building. This is how I feel about it. I think I'm generally proven right. I don't like it when people willy-nilly just throw globals on their team without thinking about what the consequences are. Now, I mean, so when you're building your team and you want globals, just judge how much you need it, how bad it can potentially hurt you, and how bad it hurts you if it gets taken away. That's my advice. Take it, leave it, whatever. That's all for this week, folks. Hopefully you enjoy this. Think about those globals before throwing them on your team. And Professor X, I still hate him. Hope to see you guys on Sundays.